The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just give a few more minutes here, a minute or two, for some of our customers to log in, and then we'll get started shortly. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar from TriStar. My name is Thiagu Palaniappan. So this is another webinar on the Creo side. So today we'll be taking a look at assembly techniques. Just an FYI, this webinar will be recorded and it'll be in our resource center. If any of your colleagues couldn't make it and you would like them to view this webinar, we have all these recordings available in our resource center. Before we get to the agenda, I just wanted to quickly run through some of the offers that we have this quarter. I mean, mainly on the simulation analysis tools that is valid through the end of June, and also on the training, on the PTC certified training courses, which are also valid through the end of June. There's also an offer on the MatCat product, which also runs through the end of June. So if you have any further questions on these three offers, please reach out to your account reps at TriStar. And we also will be, I hope many of you might have registered for the PTC Live Work. So our TriStar PLM team will be there to help you with your questions. So that's another information that I wanted to just start off before I get into the agenda. So in the next 30 minutes or so, I wanted to quickly go over some of the techniques or tips, if you will, that some of you may or may not have used, I guess, as you work in the assembly environment in Creo Parametric, right? Whether it's 2.0, 3.0, right? All the way from adding constraints, a few config options there, a few parameter options available, and also what options do you have in the model tree. We'll also, quickly go over component interface, flexibility, and the different replace options. I'll try to talk about these and show a few things in the next 30 minutes or so, and towards the end we'll have a Q&A session. So currently all of you are muted. Feel free to start typing in your questions in the question or chat session in your GoToWebinar or GoToMeeting window, and I'll try my best to answer those towards the end. So first off, constraint sets in Creo Parametric. Not sure if you have used this, but this is something that we have seen, where many customers, right, wherein they would like to have different positions of the components, but is there a quick way to switch the position using a parameter? For example, you could see the component is right now constrained to the holes there. However, I might want to have a position like that, right? So instead of a position like this, I would like to have a second set of constraint, which you could probably do even in Wildfire 5.0. I'm sure you've used the multiple constraint sets, which you can enable, disable. However, starting Creo, you have the ability to add a feature parameter called PTC constraint set that essentially allows you to switch between the two constraints, right? So, for example, I want to go to set 1 or set 2, right? So I can see without really going back and edit definition and going and trying to make that set enable or disable. You may have multiple sets like these, but there is, you would just go to your model tree and add that parameter constraint set so you can switch between the two, right? So before I move further here, let me just take a quick look at, show you that parameter option. So what I have is Creo 3.0. It also works in Creo 2.0, obviously. So let me open up an assembly wherein I do have a part that's already constrained. So if I look at my constraint sets, it has set 1, which I'm going to disable real quick, right? So I could get it out of that, right? And I can go add my own constraint here real quick. And I'm going to just say, let's add a new set, right? So I'm going to add a new set, or I can just go a new set here. And I say, okay, so I probably want to add a constraint set 2, and maybe put out. There we go, right? So I have 2 sets, right? Set 2 is enabled, set 1 is not enabled, right? Set 1, let's say I want to call it, in my view, maybe that's the left hole. And set 6, maybe I want to call it the right hole, right? And right is enabled right now. If I say OK to it now, how do I switch that? I know I can look at the constraint sets, right? I could probably go to my filters and turn on my placement folder and all that and see the constraint sets here. But what what I'm getting at is when you turn on the placement folder, you have the option to show your constraint sets here itself, right? But how do I switch between them, or how do I make one active versus the other, right? I can just add a column real quick, go to my feature parameters, and simply say PTC constraint set, right? So once I add that constraint set, you could see how it does allow me to view the active constraint set here, right? So maybe I want to set it to a left and do a regenerate. Or maybe I want to go back, redefine it, and I go to my placement tab, and maybe I got a couple of sets here, right? I have left is enabled. I disabled both, right? Both are disabled. I'm going to add a new set, right? And I'm going to add really quickly, I'm going to say, okay, let's add a constraint set. So it goes like that, and that's what I have active right now. So really we got, like, if I go to my front view roughly here, and I say I want to go to left and regenerate the model, I can go to right and I regenerate the model. I can take a look at those names here that I know what constraint sets, and this is something you could even use in a family table if you'd like, right? That's a parameter that you can call out. So that was the first thing. And then general best practice while constraining. I've seen this over the years in working with customers. I've seen there's a tendency to use the old school placement tab. And I know for adding new sets, I currently use it. But just to speed up your assembly process, just a few things, a few tips, if you will, on when you assemble or select constraints or select references for constraints. It's generally a good practice to use those 3D nodes, right? When you double click on the 3D node, you could make a change to the constraint type. You could set up offsets. You can, let's say you selected the wrong reference. You don't have to go undo, redo. Most of the time it's grayed out, undo, redo, right? Or you don't have, you can directly select the reference right here or select an alternate reference just by using the 3D node without even worrying about the placement tab, right? So that's something that you always want to use, and mainly in assemblies, you're trying to use some stable references as much as possible, like data planes or axes or what have you, and those might typically be in a layer, as you know, and when they are in the layer, it's a good practice to use the search tool. If you do a Control F, you can say I want to search for datums from this component. It could be in a layer, it could be hidden, but it still shows up in the search tool, and you can select them quickly that way, right? And as far as possible, try to use the automatic constraint rather than selecting the constraint type and then selecting the references, right? And generally, when you try to add constraints, one common complaint in Creo is, okay, I'm trying to select two surfaces, and the software always goes to normal instead of coincident, right? There are quite a few reasons for that. It also depends on some of the config options that you have set up as to why it tries to do that. The main reason it tries to do that is the approximate orientation, right, that you have between the component and the assembly. So when you have pick two surfaces, if they're roughly parallel, right, within a tolerance that you can control, right, they're going to assume that it's going to be coincident instead of normal, right? So the motion using Control-Alt, I'm sure some of you may have used it, but instead of the old move command, if you hold on the Control-Alt or just use a new 3D dragger, it's going to spin, pan, zoom your component while the assembly stays put. It's easier to avoid such unwanted constraints, right? You can always change them later on. And one config option that I like, that I used to use a lot during my industry days, is the component assemble start, which I always like it to be set to move and place instead of default, right? So when you set it to default, what happens most of the time, I mean, if you see, is it'll come in a default location on the screen. You could use two windows or same window, but you still have to move it around. The move then place automatically adds the component to your mouse cursor, so you're not spending that additional time, right? It's automatically there. You just use your mouse cursor to click where you want, and then you start selecting your references, right? And also, sometimes you may have noticed when you pick geometry, it tries to give an offset whether you need it or not, and sometimes it doesn't. So there is a tolerance for it, right? So it's called auto constraint offset tolerance. It's a config.pro option. The default is 0.5. So what the software does is it multiplies that value to the model size, to the component size. As you know, in Creo, every component has a model size, right? If you go to your information tools and check the model size, it's the largest diagonal size of the box that encloses the part, right, roughly. So it uses that, and depending on that, right, if it's less than that or more than that, that's when you see how sometimes it snaps to be coincident, or sometimes there's an offset there. You can also use the tree filter, like I showed you earlier, the previous example, to show the placement folder. Now, the placement folder is quite handy, wherein you might want to display not the features, but just the constraints. I'd like to review, have I done connections or constraints, etc., right? It's something that you could always turn it on and even save it to your tree.config file, the placement folder right here, right? So what I was getting at is, if let's do a basic assembly from scratch, a very simple one, just to go over some of those options. I'm adding, for example, a component here. Right mouse options, I quickly use my constraint there, and maybe I could possibly go to my browser and even drag and drop components, right? Now, this is the one I was talking about, as how it comes up somewhere here and I have to move it around, or I can use those. I can use a Control-Alt, I can start selecting references, or let's say I selected the wrong reference there. Right there, double click, right? I don't have to worry about the placement tab, right? right in there, I go to select, okay, maybe I should just look at that reference, or maybe I should just look at this reference, right? Or I can just change it. So everything is in the 3D node. And this is not new in Creo. It's been there in Wildfire 4 or 5, and it's even there in the Wildfire releases. Pretty nice tool, I thought, that I've not seen a lot of people take advantage of. And then I'm trying to test my degree of freedom. I might want to add another constraint here. There it is, right? I've fixed the orientation. Now I still have 1 degree of freedom there, right? Pretty straightforward, that's right. So I can just pick those references and I'm done, I'm all set. But at this time I'm thinking it should have an offset there, or I go double click and say I want to give a distance to it, right? I want to give a small offset to it. I'm going to flip it, right? The old mate align, which we call coincident and distance now, right? So all that is available. So my point is the 3D nodes, or even right mouse on the 3D node, right? So that's pretty powerful, I think, to do your assembly quickly, right? Just makes you more efficient and productive. I'm thinking, especially when you work on sort of large assemblies. Now, once you assemble these, if you look at your model tree, right, this is where that little placement folder that I was talking about, right? If you turn on that placement folder and features and you simply say, I want to expand all, it can expand pretty much your constraints, and you can take a look at your constraints. Maybe if you go to your hidden line style or no hidden line style, for example, there, kind of gives you an idea of what's going on, right? So it's pretty handy, I think, turning on your placement folders. And then the config options that I was talking about, right? You could use those too. So let me get back here. Let's say I want to assemble. I want to probably go back and assemble another one here. You can see how it's floating around, and now I have to drag it up, put it up here where I want, right? I select references, right? So maybe I want to go select some of these references, and I want to start adding some more additional, right? Let's say, so there's an invalid constraint right there, right? I've got, right? You see how it doesn't pick up the right constraints, right? Still have, I know that these two are okay, but probably these two are not of the right size, right? So if I go, so there are times where you're going to go add a new constraint, right? And I'm going to say my new constraint is between this and this, right? And I'm going to go say flat surfaces, right? Or maybe that flat surface that I did was wrong. I should be selecting this surface instead. So I'm really able to use those 3D nodes. Now, I could turn on the config option. So if I go to my config option, I can say comp assemble start, right? And you see how it's set to default, and you can either leave it packaged or constrained in a separate window, or move in place. So when I say move in place, and if I try to assemble, let's say, this tiny part here, see, it's automatically tied to my mouse cursor, right? It's a pretty handy tool, I think. All right, and then I can start selecting my references, right? So that's something that, if you configure something that you want to try out. Also, the model tree status icons. This is something that I've seen many customers request, or just maybe not aware of, or some of you are aware of, but what do those different icons next to your part name mean, right? So if it's a box, it's most likely you forgot to constrain it fully, right? It's partially constrained or packaged, or you forgot to give any constraint at all. Or maybe you have attached a part to a partially constrained component or packaged component. That's when you get those double box. Now, there used to be a frozen component option until Creo 2.0, where you can freeze a component, and that'll show with a pause symbol there. With Creo 3, it's just a fix. You no longer have the frozen or the paused regeneration state. It's just called fixed, right? It's technically fixing it for now, temporarily, and then you go and redefine it, right? And then obviously the black box is suppressed, which most of you know. If you had a little rectangular dot, it means that you probably added a few connections like pin, slider, cylinder, wherein you're allowing it to create a joint so it can apply some motion, do some kinematic or dynamic analysis, what have you, right? So those are the model tree status icons. And one other thing in assembly, which is quite beneficial in my view, is to turn on the pop-up viewer, right? So you can turn on the pop-up viewer. There's a config option for it. you might have seen this this thumbnail when you do a file open, right? Or even in Windchill you have that, right? Or if you're doing a file open within Creo, you could display them as thumbnails. But within Creo also you could turn on the config option, set it to yes, so you can see this thumbnail viewer, and you can also pre-highlight, turn on the pre-highlight, and it will say yes, right? I mean, if you turn it to yes, what it'll do is it will show you in the graphics window as you cursor over, right, your tree in a large assembly. It'll kind of cursor, it'll also highlight, it'll underline it there, and these are some nice options that you could think of using. So let's say if I were to open up one of the assemblies that I have here, pretty straightforward, and I want to just turn on those options like pre-select highlighting, right? When I turn on the pre-select highlighting, it kind of cursor over it and it highlights it. Some of you may have already turned it on in your config.pro. Show pop-up viewer, right? I turned that on too. But when I do that, right, when I cursor over it, I don't get the pop-up viewer. You know, when I do a file open, right, and when I go into this guy right here, I do get the pop-up viewer. Or maybe I can just say, show me thumbnails. It shows that way. So again, the config option, right? You go to your options here, and if you're not aware, you know, you do a search, and you could see enable pop-up display pop-up viewer, right? And if you do that pop-up help pop-up viewer, it shows that it's available only for file open. So you want to set it to yes, so that now when I cursor over, you see how it kind of, so I can expand this guy, you know, maybe the Indian block here, what exactly that is. And it might be a little handy, I think, right? Just you want to see it here too. On the left here, right? When you cursor over and wait for a second, it comes with a pop-up viewer. That's something you can turn it off here, also using the config.pro option. Some of the options that's available in the model tree that you should also take advantage of when working in assemblies is the search. There are a lot of predefined searches that you may have seen where you could say display in color, like a color-coded search, kind of, right? Packaged components in that color, failed items, it's already in red, as you know. So you could quickly use those predefined searches or use your own search, use binoculars, you want to search for part number, etc. You can do that, and you can hit that little filter icon, it'll filter it for you. And also, you have the ability to track the changes you have done per sessions, right? So you open a large assembly, you've been working on it for, I'd say, half hour or so, and you'd like to really review kind of what you did so far before committing to it or before saving the assembly, right? So you are able to do quickly view changes, which essentially gives you, again, in a color-coded fashion, the model graphics. Maybe you renamed, you deleted, you modified, you replaced a component, you resumed or suppressed, what have you, right? All the normal operations that we normally do when in assembly mode, you're able to see that, right? So that's tracking the changes. So for example, if I were to open this assembly, and I do want to, for example, I might want to start assembling some component here, right? So for example, maybe I might want to go and I forgot to assemble the spark plug for this guy here, right? So let's say if I could take that spark plug, that should go somewhere down here, I can just drag and drop it, right? I can just drag and drop it, place it on the hole right there. And it automatically assembles. The reason is I had component interface already defined, right? That's how I got it. So I assembled it. I'm going to just go resume now a drill bit that I had assembled. Maybe that's the wrong size. I would like to quickly replace, maybe with a family table here. So I want to preview that real quick, right? Or I can look at the table. I could say show table, right? It'll also show the table with all the, as you can see here. Pretty nice, right? What values you're looking for in the family table there. So I've selected that, I hit OK, and I replaced it. I might want to delete an assembly here. So I've done quite a few operations, right? So assembled, replace, etc. Now I'm thinking, is there a list of all that I did in this session. I go to View Changes, and there it goes, right? It kind of gives you in color-coded fashion as to what you did, right? So it's a pretty handy feature, I thought, that they introduced in the Creo release, right? Right-click and then go View Changes. Also, component interface. So you just saw me drag and drop that spark plug onto the engine assembly. You know, when I dragged and dropped, it was really looking for a cylindrical surface and a flat surface for the two coincident constraints. So as long as I'm pretty close to a hole, it's going to identify it. Now, you know, depending on where you click, it may go in the wrong location, which you can redefine or edit definition. But the way that was done is, you know, at the component level, it's a good practice when you have standard parts to always add a component interface. It's something that the CAD admin could do at your company or you yourselves could do, right? So you're essentially adding that to the part level. You're adding an interface telling that whenever anybody assembles this bolt, I want them to use that cylindrical surface of the bolt shank and the flat surface. That's it. And you're doing it once, saving it. You can also have a receiving interface, like on this block with a lot of holes in there. You can pattern that interface, for example. So whenever you try to assemble, you just keep clicking through those little circles, and it automatically assembles it, right? So that's a very powerful feature, I think. You can also use auto place, wherein you can roughly click on some location, and the software kind of gives you some locations based on the number of locations you have set in your preferences, right? So give me all the neighboring pairs of holes and cylindricals and flat cylindrical surfaces and flat surfaces, for example. And you can even control the search area when you use component interface. Similarly, flexible components allow you to make your components flexible, just like in the real world, right? You know, so that free state contact part, when I assemble it, obviously I'm going to change the angle of that contact, right? I might remove this guy, right? I might want to get rid of that. When we assemble it, we remove that. So that's something that we want to suppress, right? But you don't want to suppress it in the part level. So in the assembly level, you have the ability, it's kind of like, almost like using a family table behind the scenes, but it's not a family table. It's still the same part, right? But you're making it flexible, right? Or even just a simple spring, you want to have it in an expanded form, in a compressed form, right? The bill of material quantity should be correct. You're not going to change, give it a different name. It's the same part, but having different geometry states, if you will, right? The different geometric tolerances, different features, right? For instance, in assembly, different components too, right? And that's something that you can add even after the fact. So let's say you assemble something and you forgot to make it flexible. You can make it on the fly. The advantage here is when you make it flexible on the fly, you're not adding it to the part level. It's an assembly thing, right? So if you're on the fly, you're making the part flexible. You might want to make some changes, just like in the real world, right? There is a feature that needs to be added, or there's going to be a dimension that needs to be changed, but it happens in assembly. And the last thing, most important, the replace, right? I'm sure many of you might have used replace with family table, but there are quite a few options when you use replace. If you have a part that belongs to the family table, it's quite easy to replace with any of the instances. However, when you have components that are not belonging to the family table, you might want to use the Interchange Assembly, if you have the AAX license, of course, for that. And the Interchange Assembly is kind of like a bucket where you have all your different variants, right, that you put in there, and then you add reference tags ahead of time so anybody could use that Interchange Assembly to select and replace quickly. Or if you have options modeler, you could use replace by module or module variant. If you have a reference model, you have like a copy jam, or you have an inheritance feature. So you have a cast and a machined part, for example. There's a reference between the two, I could replace by a reference model. Or if you have declared your part to a layout, right? Back in the days, we used to call it layout. Now PTC is calling it notebook. In top-down design, you use that a lot. So wherein you had datums that you had that you called out in that layout, and you declared the part in the layout, you could also swap components using notebook or layout, or just by a copy, right? You just create a new part, it maintains all the references, just a different part name. But the most powerful thing in my experience is the unrelated with edit reference table. Not sure how many of you have used it, but that's pretty powerful where you could just use the systems. It's quite powerful where, it has an option called evaluate, where it kind of compares the part that you're trying to replace with the old component. And if there are part names, geometry IDs, it tries to do a pretty good comparison. And it tries to automatically do those reference tags that you would have to manually do with interchange assemblies, right? So that's called replace with unrelated option. Pretty powerful tool, that, right? Here's an example of an interchange assembly where, my interchange assembly will roughly look like this example here, where I have 4 interchange or variants, if you would, right? So which, and normally we could use, it's a track slider, and I could use this, or it could even be an assembly, could be a part, right? But I'm predefining the references there. So let me get back to Creo here. If I were to do a replace, right? So I have an assembly. So if you look at my assembly here, I do have an assembly that has this particular part, and I might have variations of this, but they're not in a family table, right? So they could be, so this particular part, so if you look at my thumbnails here, there it goes, right? I might want to use this, etc., right? So for that, what I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to do a new assembly and call it interchange. I'm going to add a functional interchange, right? So if I go to my folder here, I want to use this track slider. I want to add another functional one. I want to use my second track slider. Just place it to the side here. And I'm going to add, let's say, the third track slider. And I might want to add a fourth one, which happens to be an assembly, a subassembly, as you can see, right? There's one more component to it. So now it's just for placement, so it's almost, I can think of it as a bucket here where you have all your different variations, right? But it's not family table. Separate parts, design, but I don't want to spend the time running into failure modes when I try to replace, right? So I'm going to add my reference pairing table, so I know this is a part that's currently in the assembly. And I want to pick the reference pairs. These are the components where I want it to automatically evaluate. And if I look at my rules, it looks for component interface, same geometry, name type, history, etc. And I could say create the tags. You see, it didn't do it. I could just say evaluate it, and it did create automatically for the rest of the component. So what this allows me to do is, so in the footer, if you see, I have all those tags. See, as I'm cursoring over, it has all the tags. Now, if I go to any assembly, I could just go and say, I want to replace that with interchange assembly, where I'm essentially going to say, okay, so I could just say, okay, let's say how this guy looks like, or I can look at the component before I replace it, right? So that's what I want to replace it with. And there it goes, right? So it maintains the references or any other downstream components you might have, depending on how you referenced it. It will also carry over, right? So that's how powerful the interchange assembly is. Now, let's say you don't have AAX or you didn't use interchange assembly. You could use the unrelated option. So let's say if I want to go, I have an assembly where something like this, right? I might want to change this with a circular plant, and I know that's a separate part, but and it's not part of an interchange or a family table. I'm going to replace, but when I do the replace, though, I might want to just go use unrelated component because I know it doesn't belong to a family table or interchange. That's why it's going to grayed out, as you can see. It's not referenced. It's not part of options modeler, and it's not a copy, and it's not also declared in any notebook or layout, right? So I go to my part here and say I'm going to replace it with the circular part, and I'm going to edit the reference table, this guy right here, right? And it's almost like on the fly, you are able to create those references. So I'm going to say, let's do evaluate, and it evaluated for me, right? And I click OK, and I was able to do that. So this is very, very powerful. I have not used it, right, for replacing components really quickly on the fly. So those are some of the things that I wanted to quickly touch on, in this 30 minutes here. So hopefully that was useful. Let me see if there are any questions at this point. So please start typing in your questions in the Q&A session. There's a chat session, chat option there. If you could please type in your question. Okay, so there's one question. How can I get the change viewer? That is an awesome tool. Oh, you're talking about the view changes. Oh yeah, that's not a, yeah, it's just right-clicking on your assembly, right, in the model tree. Just click view changes, and it will show up, right? So it's just something that you can do starting Creo 2 and Creo 3, wherein you just want to track what changes you did so far when you're working in that particular session. Like I showed you in the example, when you did any type of delete, replace, etc., it's going to give you a list of all the changes you did. So it's really right-clicking on the assembly name and view changes all within Creo. All right, there's another one here. When you replace a component, does it automatically take previous constraint? I mean, what it does is, you're replacing component A with component B, right? What does it really do? It depends on how you're replacing, right? If you say unrelated and you're trying to pick component B, it's obviously going to fail, and you're right. It's going to use the previously used constraint. So let's say component A had 2 coincidents, it had an angle offset, right, 3 constraints, right? Yeah, it's going to try to use the same on the next component, right? So what we're trying to really do with these options of interchange assembly or unrelated is ahead of time you are trying to, or on the fly, right? Like I showed you the unrelated option, you're trying to have the software. It's quite powerful enough where you can compare the 2 parts. It looks for similar data names, IDs. It also looks for geometries, which you can manually select or map, what we call reference tags. And that's how it's able to apply the constraint automatically to component B without any type of failure diagnostics or without getting into a failure mode. All right, so it looks like that's it for the questions today. So moving on here. Before we wrap up here, just wanted to again remind you of the 3 offers on the Creo simulation products. as well as on PTC certified training and MathCAD. And also please remember to register for the PTC LiveWorks, and our PLM team, our experienced PLM team will be there to help you with any questions. There's one last question here. Have the same constraint as a part being replaced. Can you add on the fly? No, you cannot add a new constraint on the fly, right? What you're doing on the fly is all you're doing in that unrelated replace is you're adding reference tags on the fly. You're saying, okay, in this component, this is a whole surface, this is a new whole surface, this is the datum plane, this is a new datum plane, right? But if you have to add new constraints, it's, again, you just have to do edit definition after doing the initial replace and go add new constraints because it's already placed essentially, right? So you cannot add new constraints. All right, so with that, we look forward to seeing you all soon in another webinar. I hope it was useful. Please give us your feedback and let us know with any specific topics if you would like on the Creo or Windchill products. And we would be happy to look at it and then use those as topics for future webinars. Until then, all of you have a great rest of the week and have a nice day. Thanks.